Hi. Walter Rauschenbusch, page 164, Christianity and the Social Crisis. This time he's talking about the ascetic tendency in early medieval Christianity. He says the otherworldliness of early Christianity was only one aspect of its general ascetic view of life. When ascetic piety turns its face to the future, it longed for complete release from the world and the body, and for the bliss of pure spirituality in heaven. When it turned its face to present duties and relations, it sought to lessen the contact with the world and to wear thin the body, in order to weaken the hold of the sensuous and material over the soul, to enjoy some foretaste of the rapturous contemplation in heaven, and to prepare the spirit for its final victory and escape. This attitude of mind was common to all earnest religious movements of the ancient world. Christian asceticism was not Christian. It was only a Christian modification of a general spiritual drift in contemporary life. All these movements, in some measure, identified evil with matter. The flesh that envelops the soul is the seat of evil, hence it must be opposed and worn down. The world, with its glamour and entanglements, is a kind of larger physical integument, enchanting the soul in material and temporal interests. The less of it, the better for the soul. The spirit that desires emancipation must not only avoid excess and wrongful pleasure, but cut down all satisfaction of the natural desires to a minimum. The perfect life would be a contradiction of nature. The sexual instinct is the most insistent, powerful, and intimate form in which the soul encounters the power of the material life and the attractiveness of the world. Therefore, ascetic religion turned against sexual desire as its chief enemy. Its fight against sexual evils is one of the Church's chief titles to honor. It was a fight against tremendous odds of hereditary abnormal passions, vicious customs and opinions, and the deposit of centuries of sensuality in literature, art, and religion. The Church branded all sexual intercourse outside of marriage as mortal sin, in man as well as in woman, and so protected the happiness of the family and the most important right of woman. It stood against concubinage and the divorce evil of the ancient world. Its influence on legislation in the Roman Empire was strongest in this domain of life than in any other. But this insistence on personal purity lost much of its social value by its disparagement of the sexual life in general. Marriage, too, was regarded by many of the early church teachers as a lower moral condition, a relation necessarily involving physical defilement, a compromise with the fallen life of humanity, a concession to the weakness of the flesh. It was not a relation good in itself, but simply a preventive of licentiousness needed by the weak. Blessed were those who did not need it. Since the 2nd century, the Church honored voluntary virginity in man and woman. For a long time, it frowned on a second marriage as a blemish on Christian character. Men who were already in the bonds of marriage might become priests, but none who was already in holy orders should descend to marry. Of its higher churchmen, it early began to demand a life of abstinence, even if they were married. Finally, celibacy was demanded of all priests in the Western Church. But the moral demands imposed on the clergy as a law were imposed on all men as an ideal, especially after monasticism captured the heart of the Church from the 4th century onward. Not only the young remained unmarried, but many left their families to join the angelic choirs of the ascetic. Women handed their children over to churches or monasteries and dedicated themselves to holiness. That enthusiastic propagandist of monkery, St. Jerome, said, quote, "Though your mother with hair unbound and garments torn point to the breast that nourished you, and though your father lie on the threshold, tread over him with dry eyes and take the flag of Christ, that is, become a monk." To converted to God came to mean entering a monastery. Even Chrysostom, the sensible, pictures the model husband as the one who lives almost like a monk. Let me read that again so I get the drift a bit across. Even Chrysostom the Sensible, that is one of the greatest preachers of the Eastern Church, pictures the model husband as the one who lives almost like a monk. Well, this is very far from the Jewish point of view. It's very far from the Old Testament point of view. Although our friend Rauschenbusch doesn't stress that here. He does later. I'll put in a link to a video we did on, or two videos actually, on Jacques Ellul. His thoughts on this transition of Christian thinking in the early Middle Ages.